ex-wife takes her son to the city to find his dad, only to discover he's a wealthy billionaire. Grace Thompson never expected her past to catch up with her so dramatically. Struggling to make ends meet in a sleepy town, she answers her curious 6-year-old son Oliver's persistent question, "Where is my dad?" With her heart pounding, she decides to venture into a bustling metropolis in search of the man who once stole her heart and unknowingly fathered her child. But nothing could have prepared her for the discovery that Jonathan King, the humble dreamer she once loved, has become an elusive billionaire entrenched in a world of glitz and power. Little does Grace know that her quest will ignite a chain of life-altering events. Grace Thompson had never been one to enjoy the quiet hush of dawn until she moved to the small town of Willow Creek 6 years ago. Its rose-tinged mornings were beautiful, yes, but they were also a painful reminder of how her life had changed. She used to dream of bright lights, shared ambitions with the man she once called her husband, and the promise of a future that shimmered with possibility. Now, she woke before the sun to start her day at the local bakery, kneading dough and stacking pastries just to pay rent and keep food on the table for her son, Oliver. At 28 years old, Grace's youthful spark was still visible in her deep brown eyes, but there was an undeniable trace of weariness around them. She was the type of person who gave everything to those she loved. She had once believed that love would be enough to weather any storm. Reality had proved otherwise, leaving her with a child to raise alone and a heart weighed down by questions that had never been answered. Oliver, now a lively 6-year-old with bright blue eyes and a mischievous grin, was the spitting image of his father. It was a resemblance that simultaneously warmed Grace's heart and kept old wounds fresh. Whenever she saw Oliver climbing trees or practicing his newest magic trick for the neighbors, she remembered Jonathan's playful spirit, how he'd once performed silly card tricks just to make her laugh, dreaming of big city success as a businessman and entertainer. That was before life took an unexpected turn and they lost each other in the chaos. The exact reasons for their separation were complicated, woven with misunderstandings, financial pressures, and unspoken resentment. At 22, they had been too young to handle the responsibilities of marriage, let alone the complexities of building a future that required more than love. Jonathan had his ambitions. He wanted to move to the city, to break out of the small-town cycle, and to prove himself. Grace had wanted to support him, but found herself shackled by self-doubt and the insecurity that she might weigh him down. A few harsh words here, a tearful goodbye there, and soon their marriage was in shambles. By the time Grace discovered she was pregnant, Jonathan was gone. Working at the Willow Creek bakery offered a semblance of stability, but it was never enough to quell the ache of regret. Her boss, Linda Garcia, was a kindly middle-aged woman who'd known Grace since she was a child. Linda tried to offer moral support when she noticed Grace's faraway look during her shifts. On more than one occasion, Linda had gently asked if Grace ever considered seeking child support or trying to locate Jonathan, but Grace, stubbornly independent, always waved off the suggestion. She wasn't about to chase a man who had left her behind. But as Oliver got older, his questions became more pointed. He loved hearing stories about Jonathan. Grace had never demonized him, nor had she revealed the true depth of her heartbreak. Oliver would ask about Jonathan's favorite things, about the pranks he used to pull, or how he made Grace laugh. Every question was both a delight and a pang of sorrow. Then, one evening, as Grace was tucking Oliver into bed in their small, worn-down apartment, the boy asked, "Mommy, can I meet Dad someday?" Grace's heart squeezed in her chest. She stared at Oliver's bright, innocent eyes and felt tears prick at the corners of her own. "I don't know, sweetheart," she whispered. "He's been gone a long time." Oliver pursed his lips, determined. "But he's still my dad, right? Don't you think he wants to see me?" It was impossible to give him the answer he deserved because she truly didn't know. Part of Grace was certain that Jonathan, the man she had loved so deeply, would never have abandoned her if he'd known she was pregnant. But another part of her was furious, asking how he could simply vanish without so much as a goodbye once he set his sights on the city. The conflicting feelings created a constant tug-of-war in Grace's mind. After leaving Oliver's room that night, she sank onto the living room couch with a heavy sigh. The drab walls and the single overhead light cast everything in a yellowish glow. She gazed at the stack of unpaid bills on the chipped coffee table. She was barely making ends meet. She also sensed that her son needed a father figure now more than ever. The older Oliver got, the more urgent it felt to answer his questions, give him closure, or give them both closure. "I'm scared," she whispered to herself, "but maybe I owe him this much." Grace mulled over her predicament for days, confiding only in Linda Garcia. Linda encouraged Grace to at least try to find Jonathan's whereabouts. Even Grace's usually grumpy landlord, Mr. Greg Davis, whose only real concern was collecting rent, tactfully suggested that Oliver's father might be willing to help support the child if he knew the truth. Still, the memory of heartbreak and the fear of new rejection were powerful deterrents. Grace had spent so long burying the past under her daily routine and her responsibilities as a single mother. Digging it all up felt like opening an old wound that might never heal properly. Yet every time she looked at Oliver, his eyes sparkling with hope, his face shaped by curiosity, her resolve grew. He deserved to know his father's story, good or bad. And Jonathan deserved to know about his son, whether he cared or not. It was a single sentence from Oliver that finally tipped the scales. While finishing his peanut butter sandwich one day, he said casually, "Mom, can we take a trip to the city someday? I really want to see tall buildings and maybe find Dad. Maybe he's waiting for us." Grace swallowed hard. She couldn't stand to crush her son's excitement. Something in her chest tightened, an echo of determination she thought she had lost. She set her jaw, feeling a surge of courage well up inside her. It was time. It was past time. She was going to find Jonathan King. With Oliver's words lingering in her mind, Grace packed up her courage and called on her friend Linda for help. They sat together in the back office of the bakery, the aroma of fresh bread comforting Grace's frayed nerves. Linda typed away on her aging computer, searching for any public records or social media traces of Jonathan King. Grace hovered over her shoulder, both nervous and excited. Before long, Linda let out a small gasp. "Here's something," she murmured. "A Jonathan King has been making waves in the city's business sector. It's a big name in real estate. He co-founded something called Kingsman Holdings with a partner named Bradley Wong. It's a billion-dollar company according to this article. The CEO is—" Linda paused, reading quietly. Then she turned to Grace with her eyes wide. "It's him, Grace. His age, his hometown, everything lines up. Your Jonathan is... well, it looks like he's become incredibly successful." Grace's stomach twisted into knots. She grabbed the back of Linda's chair to steady herself. She had expected maybe Jonathan was doing well, or had found a decent job, but a billionaire. Her mind spun as she tried to reconcile the memory of the earnest, broke 20-something who once balanced an unpaid phone bill with the man described in the article, Jonathan King, visionary real estate mogul and entrepreneur. "It can't be," she whispered. "He hated wearing a tie. He used to say money wasn't everything." Her voice trailed off as the wave of reality crashed over her. Linda reached out a comforting hand. "People change, Grace, especially after 6 years." Later that evening, Grace returned home with a printout of Jonathan's corporate profile. She stared at the photo. His features were sharper, more mature, but that same crooked, confident grin was there, the same deep-set eyes that once could make her world stand still. She felt a storm of emotions swirling inside her: pride, resentment, curiosity, fear, and that same spark of affection she'd long tried to smother. Over dinner, Oliver chattered away about his day at school, barely noticing his mother's haunted expression. Once he was in bed, Grace sat at the kitchen table and wrote out a plan. 1. Save enough money for a few nights at a cheap motel in the city. 2. Seek time off from the bakery. Hopefully Linda would cover for her. 3. Travel to the city with Oliver. Try to find Jonathan in person. Or confront him. Tell him about Oliver. Just writing the steps made her hands tremble. She had no idea how Jonathan would respond. Would he reject them? Deny everything? Accuse her of lying? Or would he be indifferent, too lost in his wealth and new life to care about a boy he never knew existed? In the days that followed, Grace cut back on every possible expense. She sold a few possessions on the online marketplace, an old guitar she rarely played, a vintage jacket she'd inherited from her grandmother that didn't fit, and some spare furniture that cluttered her small apartment. It was painful, but each extra dollar felt like a step closer to a resolution. When Mr. Greg Davis noticed her bare living room, he asked if everything was all right. She smiled weakly and assured him she just needed some space. Finally, after nearly a month of scraping every cent she could spare, Grace booked a pair of bus tickets. The day she left Willow Creek was subdued. Linda cried at the bus stop, hugging Grace and Oliver tight as if they might never return. Even old Mr. Davis shuffled over, giving Oliver a playful nudge and handing Grace an envelope stuffed with a few bills. "Just in case," he muttered awkwardly. She was touched by the gesture, an example of how small towns might gossip, but they also looked out for their own. As the bus rattled away from Willow Creek, Oliver stared wide-eyed out the window. Tall grass and rolling hills gave way to open farmland, which eventually yielded to bustling suburbs. Grace tried to keep her own nerves in check by focusing on her son's excitement. He'd never traveled beyond the county line, and this was an adventure for him. She just prayed it wouldn't end in heartbreak. When they finally arrived at the city's massive bus terminal, Grace's breath hitched. She hadn't been here in years. The skyscrapers loomed overhead like iron giants. Streetlights flickered in the early evening, and the din of honking cars and rumbling trains enveloped them. Oliver clutched her hand, half in fear, half in awe. Their motel was a short taxi ride away, a run-down, neon-lit building in a neighborhood that had definitely seen better days. The sign reading "Vacancy" sputtered. Inside, the musty smell of old carpet and cheap disinfectant assaulted Grace's senses. She tried to appear brave for Oliver, who hopped onto the squeaky bed with unbridled excitement. Grace laid out their few belongings, tucking the envelope from Mr. Davis into the bottom of her backpack, grateful for the safety net. That night, she barely slept. Her mind replayed possible scenarios. Jonathan angry, Jonathan relieved, Jonathan in denial. The next morning, she woke up with her determination burning brighter. Oliver was depending on her. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. Before heading out, she checked her phone's map application, searching for Kingsman Holdings. The directions guided her to a glittering high-rise in the heart of the financial district. The address alone spoke volumes. This was prime real estate, the domain of top executives and multi-million-dollar deals. Grace felt a jolt of adrenaline rush through her. She inhaled deeply, determined to stand her ground, no matter what she found. Oliver slipped his hand into hers. "Are we going to see Dad now?" he asked, his eyes big with anticipation. Grace forced a small smile. "Yes, sweetheart. It's time we find him." The next morning, Grace and Oliver made their way through the bustling metropolis. Skyscrapers towered on every side, casting long shadows across busy avenues. Yellow taxis vied for space with sleek black sedans and roaring motorcycles. The sidewalks teemed with well-dressed professionals, street vendors hawking pretzels and hot dogs, and tourists snapping pictures of iconic buildings. Oliver's eyes sparkled like never before. "Mommy, look, that building goes all the way to the clouds," he exclaimed, pointing at a jagged spire that seemed to pierce the sky. His enthusiasm momentarily soothed Grace's anxiety. They hopped onto a crowded commuter train, struggling to find seats. Oliver clung to her side as she navigated the station's labyrinthine passages. She was thankful for the handful of kind strangers who helped direct her, including a security guard named Robert Johnson, who pointed them toward the correct exit. He offered a friendly smile and asked if they were visiting. Grace mustered a polite nod, too preoccupied with her mission to delve into details. Emerging onto a wide street lined with glass-sheathed towers, Grace caught sight of the sign that read Kingsman Holdings at the entrance of an imposing skyscraper. Her pulse thumped against her ribcage. The building had a modern design, dark reflective glass, sleek steel edges, and enormous revolving doors that whirred with a steady flow of suited employees coming and going. As Grace approached, she tightened her grip on Oliver's hand. They stepped inside, greeted by the cool rush of air conditioning and the gleam of polished marble floors. The lobby was cavernous, with a minimalist design that exuded wealth and status. A massive gold logo for Kingsman Holdings dominated the far wall. Employees, sporting sharp suits and chic dresses, hurried by, each seemingly on an urgent errand. Grace's nerves spiked. She tried to maintain her composure, stepping up to the reception desk manned by a poised, immaculate woman. The woman's nameplate read, Melissa. She offered a professional smile, but her eyes flicked disapprovingly toward Oliver, as if children were a foreign presence in this immaculate corporate world. "Good morning. How may I help you?" Melissa asked in a practiced tone. Grace cleared her throat. "I'd like to speak with Jonathan King, please." Melissa's professional smile tightened. "Do you have an appointment, Ms. Thompson? My name is Grace Thompson." She swallowed hard. I do not have an appointment. It's a personal matter." Melissa's gaze drifted toward Oliver again. The receptionist tapped some keys on her computer. "Mr. King's schedule is fully booked for the next few weeks. He does not see visitors without a prior arrangement. I'm afraid I can't help you." Before Grace could respond, Oliver spoke up. "But he's my dad. We've come a really long way to see him. Can't you just call him?" His wide, innocent eyes looked up at Melissa, causing the woman's stiff expression to falter momentarily. The moment was awkward. Melissa glanced around, perhaps worried about drawing attention. "Look," she said softly, leaning forward so only Grace and Oliver could hear. "Mr. King is extremely busy. We don't allow walk-ins. If you want to leave your contact information, I can forward it to his assistant." Grace's heart sank. This sterile rejection felt like an omen, but she refused to be deterred. She thought quickly and scribbled her cell phone number on a piece of paper. "Please, just let him know we're here," she insisted. "It's very important." Melissa took the piece of paper gingerly, as if it might burst into flames. "I'll let his assistant know," she repeated with a tight nod. "Have a good day, Ms. Thompson." Grace and Oliver retreated, feeling dejected. For the rest of the day, they hovered around various coffee shops near the Kingsman building, hoping for a callback. Each time her phone vibrated, Grace snatched it up. But the calls were only spam offers or Linda checking in from Willow Creek. With each passing hour, Grace's tension mounted. At lunchtime, they grabbed sandwiches from a small deli, where Oliver again voiced his disappointment. "How come they wouldn't let us see Dad?" he asked, biting into his tuna sandwich. Grace ruffled his hair. "Mr. King is probably a busy man. We'll try again tomorrow, okay?" She tried to sound upbeat, but fear gnawed at her. What if Jonathan wouldn't see them at all? They spent the next day repeating the same attempt. Grace even ventured to a side entrance where employees flashed badges to gain entry. She was politely but firmly turned away. With no clear plan, Grace felt like she was banging her head against a wall. Each night in the dingy motel room, she tried to remain calm for Oliver's sake, though she knew funds were dwindling. On the third day, as they lingered across the street from the building, Grace spotted a man stepping out of a sleek black town car, accompanied by 2 security guards. Her heart skipped a beat. Even from a distance, she recognized Jonathan's tall frame and the confidence in his stride. Time seemed to slow. She grabbed Oliver's hand and sprinted across the crosswalk, ignoring the irate honks of impatient drivers. "Jonathan!" she shouted over the roar of the city traffic. He paused briefly, scanning the crowd for whoever had called his name. Their eyes locked. In that moment, Grace felt a rush of memories, regrets, and a strange flutter of relief. Jonathan King, her Jonathan, stood there, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that highlighted his muscular shoulders. His hair was shorter, styled in a sophisticated cut. This was a far cry from the rumpled, carefree Jonathan she remembered. Oliver tugged on Grace's sleeve, eyes wide. "Mom, that's him." Before Grace could respond, Jonathan's expression turned from curiosity to a flash of recognition, tinged with disbelief and perhaps even alarm. He lifted a hand toward his security to pause them. Stepping forward, he breathed out, "Grace." In that moment, Grace realized how surreal the situation was. Reuniting with the man she'd married as a naive 22-year-old, now standing in front of the offices of his billion-dollar company. She swallowed the lump in her throat, trying to compose herself, but tears sprang to her eyes. "Yes, it's me," she managed. "And this is Oliver, Jonathan. He's your son." Jonathan's eyes darted to the little boy clinging to Grace's side. Oliver stared up at him, half in awe, half in apprehension. The city noises faded to a dull roar as father and son locked eyes for the first time. The moment hung in the air, thick with unresolved emotions. Jonathan's security guards looked uncertain, waiting for his command, while passers-by cast curious glances. Jonathan motioned them all away and murmured something to one of the guards. Then he focused on Grace and Oliver. For several seconds, no one spoke. "Let's talk somewhere private," Jonathan finally said, adjusting the lapels of his suit as though to buy time. His voice was calm, but laced with tension. Grace nodded, tears still stinging the corners of her eyes. Jonathan led them into the imposing skyscraper, ignoring the wide-eyed stares of employees in the lobby. He pressed the button for a top-floor executive suite. When the elevator doors slid shut, the silence was palpable. Oliver clutched Grace's hand, stealing glances at the tall, magnetic figure he'd known only from stories. They arrived in a lavish penthouse office, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a breathtaking cityscape, polished wood floors, and artful decor that screamed sophistication. Jonathan motioned for them to sit on a pristine leather sofa. Grace perched on the edge, feeling like she'd stepped into a different universe. Oliver looked around in wonder, eyes flicking between the gleaming skyline and the father he'd just met. Jonathan took a seat on a matching armchair, carefully setting his phone and briefcase aside. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze flickering between Grace and Oliver. "You have a child," he said slowly, as though testing the words. "My child? How can that be?" Grace inhaled sharply. "After you left Willow Creek, I found out I was pregnant. I tried to reach you, but you'd changed your number, and I had no address or way to find you. I was scared and alone, so I just did my best." His expression shifted. Confusion, disbelief, possibly a hint of guilt. I didn't know," he said quietly. Then he sighed, running a hand through his neatly cropped hair. "It's been 6 years, Grace." She could hear the accusation behind his words. "I had no idea you'd made it big," she replied, voice quivering. "It wasn't about money. Oliver started asking about you. He deserves to know his father." A tense stillness followed. Oliver shifted closer to Grace. Finally, Jonathan turned to the boy. "Oliver," he said gently, as though tasting the name, "how old are you now?" "I'm 6, Oliver replied in a small voice, eyes wide. "Mom says I look like you." Jonathan exhaled a soft laugh that sounded like a mixture of wonder and heartbreak. "Yeah, I see that. He paused, swallowing thickly. "You have my eyes, kiddo." The conversation that followed was a halting dance of questions and explanations. Jonathan pressed Grace for details, wanting to know every minute aspect of Oliver's life. His favorite color, his birthday, how he liked school, what his favorite games were. It was overwhelming for Oliver, who answered shyly, eventually relaxing enough to share how he wanted to be a magician or an astronaut one day. Grace explained the hardships they'd faced, carefully omitting the darkest moments of her desperation, but her voice trembled as she touched on the loneliness she'd felt when she realized he was gone for good. Jonathan listened intently, eyes clouded by regret. When they finally lapsed into silence, she dared to voice the question that gnawed at her soul. "Why didn't you come back, Jonathan? Why did you leave like that?" He leaned back, eyes drifting to the city skyline. "I was young and frustrated. I felt stuck in Willow Creek. I wanted to make something of myself. My father's business had just gone under, and I didn't see a future there. We argued all the time. I thought we both wanted out. I took off to find work in the city, to build a life where I could offer you stability. But everything happened so fast." He paused, glancing at Grace with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "When you didn't follow, I assumed you didn't want to be with me anymore. You never answered my last texts or calls. I thought you'd moved on. I never imagined you were pregnant." Grace's jaw clenched. "I never got those calls, Jonathan. I changed my number after the rent went unpaid, and my phone was cut off. You never wrote letters. You never asked Linda. You just vanished." Jonathan shook his head, as though battling his own confusion. "God, Grace, I was so wrapped up in trying to prove myself, I guess I just believed you didn't want me back. Over time, I told myself it was for the best if we moved on." A swirl of past hurt and missed connections weighed on them. Grace realized how quickly pride, anger, and miscommunication had eroded what once seemed unbreakable. This new knowledge both angered and saddened her. They could have saved each other so much pain if either of them had tried harder to mend the gap. "I need time," Jonathan said finally, voice soft, eyes focused on Oliver. "I want to know my son, but everything is happening at once. Let me figure things out. We can do a paternity test if that's okay, just to confirm. Then we'll talk about what happens next. For now, you both are welcome to stay here in the city at my expense, in a safer place than that motel you mentioned." Grace's chest felt heavy. She glanced at Oliver, who was fidgeting with the edge of his shirt, a mixture of excitement and confusion rippling across his face. Jonathan was offering a cautious olive branch, but there was still a distance between them, a chasm carved by 6 years of unanswered questions. She nodded. "Okay," she whispered, forcing steadiness into her voice. "We'll do the test, but please, don't give Oliver any false hope. He's so excited just to be near you." Jonathan nodded solemnly. "I won't," he said, "but if he is mine—" He paused, as if the weight of the realization was too much. "If he's mine, then I have a lot of making up to do." From there, Jonathan called his assistant, a sleek woman named Cecilia Lee, who arranged a suite for Grace and Oliver in a nearby luxury hotel. Grace felt both gratitude and discomfort. She was no longer the girl who dreamed of penthouse living and fancy clothes, yet here she was, stepping into the plush lobby of a 5-star establishment. Everything felt surreal. Later that night, in the quiet of the hotel suite, Grace tucked Oliver into an enormous bed. She could barely process the day's revelations. Jonathan had changed, but so had she. They were two strangers linked by a past love and a child. As she turned off the lights, Grace sank onto her own bed, the city lights twinkling through the window. A part of her felt relief. She had finally found Jonathan. Another part of her was terrified. What if this new, wealthy Jonathan King had no room in his life for them? Fatigue eventually dragged her into restless sleep, haunted by flashbacks of simpler times and overshadowed by the uncertain future looming ahead. Over the following week, Jonathan made arrangements for a discreet DNA test. While waiting for results, he insisted on providing Grace and Oliver with all they needed: fresh clothes, toys for Oliver, and even a personal driver named Marcus to shuttle them around. Initially, Grace resisted, feeling overwhelmed by such lavishness. She'd grown accustomed to scrimping and saving, always watching her account balance with dread. Now Jonathan seemed intent on showering them with resources she'd never dreamed of. In these days, Jonathan tried to bond with Oliver in small, tentative ways. He took Oliver to a high-tech arcade, showed him magic tricks he remembered from his youth, and even taught him how to tie a simple tie, the fatherly lessons that Oliver had craved. Each time, Oliver's face lit up like 1,000 suns. Grace observed from the sidelines, torn between relief and caution. The paternity test was still pending, though in her heart she already knew. Oliver's resemblance to Jonathan was too striking for coincidence, but life was not going to let them settle into an easy rhythm. One afternoon, as Grace and Oliver finished lunch at a stylish cafe, courtesy of Jonathan's credit account, they returned to the hotel suite to find a tall, impeccably dressed woman standing in the living area. She was flipping through a magazine with a bored expression. The moment Grace stepped inside, the woman's eyes flicked to her, full of cool assessment. "Oh," the woman said, her tone dripping with a cultivated edge. "You must be Grace. I'm Vivian Harper, Jonathan's fiancée." A chill raced down Grace's spine. She forced a polite smile. I'm sorry. I didn't realize Jonathan—" "Yes, well, I understand this must all be quite a shock for you," Vivian interrupted, placing the magazine aside. Her lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jonathan told me about you and the child." Before Grace could respond, Vivian turned her gaze upon Oliver. Her expression softened slightly, perhaps out of practiced etiquette, but Grace sensed a guarded curiosity there. Oliver, sensing the tension, shuffled closer to Grace. Vivian's elegance was evident in every detail: the tailored designer dress, the delicate diamond earrings, the perfectly coiffed hair. She looked like she belonged in this world of wealth and influence, while Grace felt distinctly out of place in her second-hand floral blouse. "Jonathan asked me to stop by," Vivian continued, "to meet you both. He'll be joining us soon, but he's running late due to a board meeting." She gestured for them to sit. Grace reluctantly sat on the plush couch, with Oliver perched beside her. An awkward silence settled, punctuated by Oliver's restless fiddling with his shoelaces. Finally, Vivian cleared her throat. "I'm sure this must be quite exciting for Oliver, suddenly meeting someone like Jonathan who's accomplished so much. But I'd like to clarify something, Grace." She paused, leveling a chilly gaze at Grace. "Jonathan and I have built a life together. We're planning our wedding for next spring. We have shared goals, philanthropic endeavors, a social circle that expects certain standards. I need to ensure that what you're doing is legitimate." Grace bristled. "I'm not here to scam Jonathan, if that's what you're suggesting." She tried to keep her voice calm, but anger simmered beneath the surface. "We just want the chance to know him, especially Oliver." Vivian's eyes flickered. "Yes, the DNA test. Well, once that's confirmed, I'm sure Jonathan will do his part in supporting Oliver. But I hope you realize that Jonathan's responsibilities are vast. He doesn't have time for disruptions." Grace's cheeks heated. "Oliver is not a disruption. He's Jonathan's son, and that means something." Before the conversation could escalate, the door opened and Jonathan walked in, tie loosened and a harried expression on his face. He halted, noticing the tense standoff. "Ah," he said, clearing his throat. "I see you two have met." Vivian turned, her expression instantly transforming into a bright smile. She glided over to Jonathan, kissing him lightly on the cheek. "Yes, darling. I was just getting to know your guests." Jonathan nodded stiffly. He greeted Oliver with a kind smile and ruffled his hair. Then he glanced at Grace, and a flicker of concern passed between them. "Vivian," he said, gently taking her arm.
"Could you give me a minute to speak with Grace privately?" Vivian's eyebrows rose, but she nodded graciously. "Of course, darling. I'll wait for you in the dining area."
"Oliver, would you like a juice or something?" she asked the child, who hesitated before nodding shyly. Vivian walked off, leaving Jonathan and Grace to exchange uneasy glances. Jonathan rubbed his temples. "I'm sorry. I should have given you a heads up. Vivian wanted to meet you both because she's a part of my life," and Grace's eyes narrowed. She seems very protective of that life. He sighed. She is. She's not a bad person, Grace. We've been together 2 years. I don't think she knows how to handle this. Honestly, neither do I. Grace huffed, frustration bubbling up. We are not here to intrude on your life or your engagement, Jonathan, but this is Oliver's life we're talking about. He's your son, regardless of what Vivian wants. A spark of defensiveness lit Jonathan's features. I know that, and once the test results come in, we'll figure out the next steps. In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you could try to get along with her. This is a big shock to everyone. Grace took a measured breath. Fine. But don't ask me to minimize Oliver or act like we're just a passing inconvenience. If you want to be in his life, you have to be all in. Jonathan nodded, his expression conflicted. He glanced toward the dining area where Vivian's voice carried softly as she offered Oliver a sparkling juice from a crystal decanter. Give me some time, Grace. I need to process all of this. After that tense introduction, the following days were a balancing act. Vivian insisted on involving herself in every outing and every discussion about Oliver's future, which turned normal father-son moments into awkward group affairs. She would join them for dinner at exclusive restaurants, where Oliver struggled with complicated menus, and Grace felt out of place under the watchful eyes of society's elite. Vivian seemed determined to keep a tight rein on Jonathan's newly discovered paternity situation, as if wary that Grace and Oliver might threaten her upcoming marriage. Nonetheless, Oliver's innocent joy was undeniable. He'd found his father, and he relished every second of Jonathan's hesitant but earnest attention. They played catch in a private sports club. Jonathan taught him a few more card tricks, and in Oliver's laughter, Grace saw hints of the man she once fell in love with, the dreamer, the magician who believed in making life a little brighter. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Grace could feel Vivian's subtle disapproval, and it was becoming clear that Jonathan's life was more complicated than ever. He was juggling corporate responsibilities, an upcoming IPO, a fiancé with social ambitions, and now a child he never knew existed. Whenever Grace tried to speak with Jonathan alone about Oliver's long-term needs, school, healthcare, emotional stability, Vivian would appear, guiding Jonathan's attention elsewhere or reminding him of critical business engagements. Grace's instincts told her that something had to give. Jonathan's world was too tightly wound, too reliant on maintaining a facade of perfection. And Grace suspected that Vivian Harper would go to great lengths to keep her pristine future intact, even if it meant pushing Oliver and Grace aside when the time was right. A few more days passed, and the long-awaited DNA test results arrived. Jonathan personally came to deliver the news to Grace in the opulent hotel suite. Oliver was out with Marcus, the driver, enjoying a trip to the toy store. Jonathan seemed on edge, pacing by the window that revealed a panorama of skyscrapers. When he finally handed Grace the sealed envelope, his voice was thick. I already know, but here, open it. Grace's hands trembled as she tore the seal. She skimmed the official lines until she spotted the key sentence. 19.999% probability of paternity. Relief and a strange, giddy sense of validation washed over her. She looked up, eyes brimming with tears. Jonathan gave a shaky exhale and sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I'm sorry, he mumbled, his voice muffled. I should have been there. I should have tried harder to find you. Grace sat beside him, placing a tentative hand on his shoulder. We can't change the past, she said quietly. We can only decide what comes next. Their moment was broken by the sharp clicking of heels on the marble floor. Vivian strode into the suite, her gaze immediately zeroing in on the open envelope. So, she said, voice tight. It's confirmed. Jonathan stood, squaring his shoulders. Yes, Oliver is my son. Vivian's expression flickered. Congratulations, Jonathan. She hesitated, then pressed on. We need to talk about how this impacts everything. The board meeting next week, the IPO announcement. There's a lot at stake. Grace bristled at Vivian's tone. Oliver is not an impact on the company. He's a child who needs his father. Vivian turned her gaze toward Grace, eyes narrowing. I'm well aware of that, but Jonathan's position is precarious right now. The slightest misstep or scandal could affect investor confidence. We need to control the narrative. Anger flared in Grace's chest. Narrative? You're talking about a human life like it's a PR move. Jonathan stepped between them, his palm raised. Enough, he said, the weariness evident in his voice. Vivian, we'll handle the press if necessary, but my priority is Oliver. I won't let business overshadow him. Vivian's cheeks flushed, but she maintained her composure. Of course, she murmured, eyes flicking from Grace to Jonathan. Just don't forget everything we've worked for, Jonathan. With that, she turned on her heel and left, leaving a charged silence in her wake. Jonathan watched her go, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He turned back to Grace, looking conflicted. She's not wrong about the scrutiny, he admitted. We've got a major IPO on the horizon, and the board is expecting a certain image of stability. But Oliver, Grace shook her head. He doesn't need a father who's only half in. Jonathan, if you can't stand up for him because of your business deals, then maybe we should just go home. Jonathan grasped her hand. Don't say that. I want to be in Oliver's life. I'm learning how to juggle all this. I promise. Grace nodded slowly, though doubt gnawed at her. She remembered Jonathan's fierce ambition, how it once drove a wedge between them. Now that ambition had taken him to unimaginable heights, but at what cost? Over the next week, tensions escalated. While Jonathan busied himself with board meetings and negotiations, Grace caught glimpses of corporate drama swirling around them. Rumors circulated in the press about Jonathan King's sudden personal developments. Vivian was often seen whispering with members of the executive team. Grace even overheard a heated exchange between Vivian and Jonathan's business partner, Bradley Wong, who seemed concerned about the potential fallout of a secret child revealed so close to the IPO launch. Grace tried to stay out of the corporate crossfire, focusing on Oliver's well-being. She arranged for him to visit a local elementary school just to see what city life might be like if they stayed. The school boasted advanced computer labs and extracurricular programs that Oliver found thrilling. She watched her son's eyes light up as he explored the new environment. For a moment, Grace entertained the possibility of building a life here, with Jonathan in the picture, providing Oliver with endless opportunities. Could it be real? But then came the sabotage. Late one evening, Grace was called frantically by Linda Garcia from Willow Creek. "Grace, are you all right?" Linda asked, her voice trembling. "Some reporter came snooping around the bakery today, asking all sorts of questions about you, Oliver, and your relationship with Jonathan King. Mr. Davis told him to shove off, but they took pictures. It was strange. I was worried." Grace felt her blood run cold. "Reporters in Willow Creek? How did they know where to find me?" "That's what I'm saying," Linda murmured, voice heavy with concern. "They seem to know about your entire history." Shaken, Grace shared the incident with Jonathan the next day. His face darkened. "I'll have my PR team look into it. This might be an external leak, or it could be internal. Some people at Kingsman might be eager to see me stumble. Let me handle it." Later that afternoon, an unexpected visitor knocked on the suite door. Bradley Wong, Jonathan's co-founder and longtime friend. He was a lean man with sharp, intelligent eyes, dressed in a sleek suit. He greeted Grace cordially, then motioned for her to sit. "I apologize for coming unannounced," he began, voice gentle. "I wanted to speak with you about some concerns. Jonathan is going to be extremely busy the next few days, and I think it's best we clear the air." Grace tensed. "What concerns?" Bradley sighed, his gaze drifting to Oliver. He gestured for the boy to move into the bedroom momentarily. He had brought a small bag of puzzle toys as a distraction. Once Oliver was out of earshot, Bradley returned his focus to Grace. Jonathan told me about the paternity test. I'm happy for him. He's a good man, and I believe he wants to do right by you and Oliver, but not everyone in our circle feels the same. Vivian? Grace prompted, crossing her arms. Bradley hesitated, then nodded. She's made certain insinuations, trying to cast doubt, sow fear about your motives. She's also been pressuring Jonathan to finalize a prenuptial agreement that would limit any claims you or Oliver might have on his assets. Fury roiled in Grace's chest. How dare she? This isn't about money. I believe you, Bradley said, raising a hand as if to calm her. But I've known Vivian for a while. She's ambitious, laser-focused on her social standing. I suspect she might have arranged the tabloid leak to corner Jonathan into making a quick decision, either publicly disown you or bring you under his control. Grace's face paled. She clenched her fists. Jonathan swore he'd protect Oliver, but he's been so tangled up in corporate affairs. Bradley gave a solemn nod. He's under immense pressure. But I know Jonathan. He loves Oliver, and I suspect he still loves you. He paused, weighing his words. Vivian told me privately that if she can't secure Jonathan's commitment fully, she'll spin the story her way. She has influential contacts in media and politics. She threatened to tarnish Oliver's reputation, claiming you've manipulated the narrative. I thought you should know. Shaken, Grace felt tears of anger well up. This was beyond a personal feud. Vivian was threatening her child's future. What can I do? She asked, voice trembling. Bradley's gaze turned thoughtful. Fight for what you deserve. Force Jonathan to make a choice, or at least to draw some clear boundaries. He can't let Vivian or the board or the press manipulate him when it comes to his own son. He hesitated, then pulled out a business card. If you need legal counsel, here's someone I trust. They won't be swayed by corporate politics. And Grace, just know that not everyone here is your enemy. Grace thanked him. After he left, she locked herself in the bathroom, letting the rush of water from the faucet drown out her ragged breathing. Rage burned through her veins. How dare Vivian threaten Oliver? How dare she paint them as gold diggers, messing with a child's well-being for the sake of a perfect wedding? By the time Jonathan arrived that evening, Grace was bracing herself for a confrontation. He came bearing a bottle of champagne, face glowing with the triumph of the IPO. But his elation waned when he noticed the storm brewing in her eyes. "Grace, what's wrong?" he asked, setting the bottle aside. She folded her arms, voice tight. "Bradley told me what Vivian's been up to. She's trying to pressure you into a prenuptial agreement, threatening to tarnish Oliver in the media, and you're letting her, Jonathan." He grimaced. "Vivian's definitely anxious, but threatening Oliver is outrageous. I won't let that happen." "Then prove it," Grace snapped, tears threatening to spill. "She's dominating every decision you make. She calls me a disruption, an intrusion. Oliver is your son. If you won't fight for him, who will?" Jonathan raked a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I've been juggling 1,000 things. The IPO was crucial. Now that it's done, I can shift my priorities. I'll talk to Vivian tonight, make things crystal clear." Grace nodded, her voice wavering. "I just hope you're not too late." As if summoned by the tension, the suite door burst open, and Vivian swept in, face taut. She took in the champagne bottle, Grace's tearful expression, and Jonathan's panicked stance. Her lips thinned. "Jonathan, we have a crisis," she declared. "Rumors are swirling that your fathering this child is going to scare off a major investor. We need to do damage control now. I've arranged a meeting with our PR team tomorrow. We need to release a statement disowning any gold-digging claims and reassuring the markets that you're fully focused on Kingsman." Grace's voice came out in a low, furious hiss. "Really? That's your solution?" Vivian barely spared her a glance. "And you need to leave the city by the end of the week, Grace. The media attention is too disruptive." Jonathan stepped forward, eyes blazing. "That's enough, Vivian. Oliver's not going anywhere." Her mask of composure slipped. "Be reasonable, Jonathan. We can't let this child derail everything. if she sues for a portion of your assets. Stop! Jonathan roared, the sound echoing in the plush suite. He drew in a ragged breath, turning resolutely toward Vivian. I won't throw my son out to protect a business image. If that's what you want, then maybe we shouldn't be engaged. Vivian's face went white. You can't mean that, she whispered, tears suddenly glistening in her eyes. You're choosing her over me? I'm choosing my son, Jonathan answered quietly, stepping back. And if you ever threaten him again, you can consider us finished. Vivian seemed paralyzed by shock and fury. She cast a poisonous glare at Grace, then stormed out in a flurry of designer fabric and shattered pride. Jonathan stood there, shoulders sagging, as though a great weight had finally lifted, only to leave him exposed and drained. Grace watched him, tears slipping down her cheeks. You did it, she whispered. Thank you. Jonathan turned, meeting her gaze with a mix of sorrow and relief. I'm sorry it took so long, he murmured. Oliver deserves better than this. I should have seen what Vivian was doing sooner. For a moment they stood there, uncertain of what would come next. But at least one thing was clear. The facade of Jonathan's perfect life had cracked, and in the breaking there was room for truth to flourish. The question was whether that truth could mend what had been broken years ago, or if it would all shatter under the glare of scandal and corporate greed. The fallout from Jonathan's confrontation with Vivian was swift and dramatic. By the next morning, tabloids were ablaze with headlines like "Billionaire King breaks engagement in favor of secret family." Gossip columns had a field day, painting Vivian as a jilted bride and Grace as a triumphant interloper. The truth, as always, was more nuanced and far less sensational, but public perception was a beast with a mind of its own. For Jonathan, the immediate consequences were intense. Vivian demanded compensation for the cancelled wedding and threatened to drag him into court for emotional distress. She had powerful connections, and she wasn't afraid to use them. Jonathan's legal team prepared for battle, but Bradley Wong stepped in to mediate, hoping to prevent a messy lawsuit that could destabilize their newly public company. It was a delicate dance, but eventually an out-of-court settlement was arranged. The details were sealed, leaving the media to speculate wildly. Throughout the chaos, Grace worried about Oliver. She kept him away from the screaming paparazzi and the swirling rumors, focusing on simple pleasures: a trip to the park, a movie night in the hotel suite, or reading bedtime stories together. Jonathan tried to be there as much as possible, but the demands of his empire, plus the legal fallout with Vivian, left him stretched thin. Still, each moment he spent with Oliver was genuine. They built Lego towers together, laughed at silly cartoons, and discovered small joys that overshadowed the outside frenzy. As the weeks passed, public interest began to wane. Bigger scandals arose. Jonathan's PR team rebranded him as a devoted father, stepping up after a long-lost family connection. They released official statements clarifying that Grace was not some opportunist, but someone who had only wanted her child to know his father. The narrative turned sympathetic, and soon the paparazzi found new subjects to chase. At last, the city offered a fragile calm. Jonathan proposed a fresh start. He leased a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment in a peaceful, family-oriented neighborhood, away from the corporate high-rises and paparazzi-laden streets. He suggested Grace and Oliver move in, at least temporarily, to see if city life suited them. Part of Grace wanted to run back to Willow Creek, to the predictable quiet she knew, but Oliver's excitement at the new apartment was contagious, and so she allowed herself to take a risk. Moving day was a patchwork of boxes, bubble wrap, and the smell of fresh paint. Oliver raced through the empty rooms, planning where to put his bed, his posters, his toys. Grace couldn't help but smile at his unbridled joy. Jonathan arrived later, having spent the morning in back-to-back meetings. His shoulders relaxed when he stepped through the door, seeing his son bounding about. "How's my future astronaut?" he teased, scooping Oliver into a playful hug. The boy giggled, and Grace felt a twinge of warmth. This was what she'd always hoped for, a father who loved Oliver as fiercely as she did. Once Oliver was in bed that night, Grace and Jonathan sat on the living room floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and half-assembled furniture. A single lamp bathed them in a soft glow. Jonathan took a deep breath. "I want to apologize," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "For everything. For leaving you back then, for not doing more to find you, for allowing Vivian to treat you so horribly, for letting the tabloids run wild. You deserved better, Grace." She studied him, noticing the worry lines on his brow and the vulnerability in his eyes. "I can't pretend it doesn't still hurt," she admitted softly. "But we have Oliver now. We can't dwell on the past forever." He nodded, hesitating before speaking. "Would it be too much to hope we can try again? For us? I know so much has changed. I'm not the same man you married, but maybe we can get to know each other again, without the secrets and misunderstandings." Grace felt her heart flutter, a sensation both exhilarating and frightening. She had once loved Jonathan King with all her being, and the bitterness of his absence had shaped her life for 6 years. Yet here he was, humbler than she ever imagined possible, asking for a chance to rebuild. "I'm not sure," she answered honestly, her voice trembling. "We can take it one day at a time. Right now, I just want to focus on Oliver's happiness and stability." Jonathan's gaze was steady. "I'm okay with that. I'll earn your trust back, I promise." And so began a cautious dance, co-parenting, shared dinners, late-night talks over takeout in their new living room. Jonathan would fill Grace in on the day's corporate challenges, including the occasional leftover drama from Vivian. Grace would share funny anecdotes from Oliver's new school, where he was thriving with the advanced curriculum and forging new friendships. On weekends, they'd explore the city together, visiting museums, local festivals, and even an out-of-town amusement park where Oliver screamed with delight on every roller coaster ride. Slowly but surely, the walls between Grace and Jonathan began to crumble. They revisited old memories, laughing at the silly arguments that once seemed so insurmountable. There were tears too, acknowledging missed moments. Oliver's first steps, his first words, birthdays without a father present. But with each raw confession, they felt the burden of past regrets lighten. One evening, after Oliver had fallen asleep, they sat on the apartment balcony overlooking the sparkling city lights. Jonathan reached for Grace's hand, and she allowed it, feeling his warmth chase away the night's chill. "You know," Jonathan murmured, voice husky, "sometimes I think back to the day I left Willow Creek, how full of ambition and foolish pride I was. If I could go back in time, I'd never let you go." Grace's eyes glistened with tears she tried to hold back. "We can't change the past," she whispered, echoing her earlier words. "But maybe the future can be brighter." In that moment, the promise of a shared life glowed between them, tentative but full of hope. They kissed softly, under the backdrop of a city that had once symbolized their separation and now offered a chance at unity. Oliver's laughter carried through the hallway, reminding them what truly mattered. This was no fairy tale resolution, no happily ever after guaranteed. Yet it was enough, a second chance to build something real. And so Grace Thompson, the ex-wife who had come to the city on a quest for closure, discovered far more: a wealthy billionaire father for her son, the opportunity to give Oliver a future brimming with possibility, and the spark of a love that might just be reborn. The road ahead remained uncertain, but at least they would walk it together, bound by the unbreakable bond of family and the unwavering hope for something better than before. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, heartbreak, and second chances. Grace Thompson's brave decision to bring her son Oliver to the city ultimately led them to a world of power and wealth, but more importantly, it reconnected a family divided by misunderstandings and time. Their story shows us that it's never too late to seek forgiveness, rebuild bonds, and believe in the transformative power of love. If you found inspiration, joy, or even a few tears in Grace and Jonathan's dramatic reunion, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue creating heartfelt stories that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit. Spread the word, stay tuned for more compelling content, and remember, sometimes the greatest riches in life are the people we choose to hold close. Thank you for watching.